All right, everyone. Welcome back to another amazing episode of EdUp Career Schools, The Scoop with your host, Kathy Belletti. Today is going to be a lot of fun and informative because I have two very important individuals with me today. I know some of you have been hearing about the new regulations. We're talking about low enrollments across the board. And I know some of you, your stress level is at an all-time high, but it's okay. We're going to walk you through some of these challenges and bring some light to the situation. All right. So first, I am going to introduce my co-host for today, Deborah Solmor. First off, she is the new host of EdUp Legal, and she just launched her first episode. Congratulations, Deborah.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here to co-host with you. I'm honored to be a part of the EdUp Experience family and looking forward to my new podcast.
Absolutely. And we're honored to have you as a part of the crew.
Thank
So
you.
Deborah has also been in the higher education space for about a decade. As the head of litigation and chief compliance officer for a large publicly traded family of proprietary schools, and most recently, in the past 5 years, as general counsel and corporate secretary of a system of 6 nonprofit colleges and universities. Deborah, you are killing it in the game.
Thank you. That was a mouthful, huh?
I know, right? Had to take a breath after there. Now, for our special guest, we have Terance Gonsalves. He is the partner and chair of the education practice at the law firm of Alston and Bird. How are you doing today, Terry?
I am doing great. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
Absolutely. Same here. So before we get started, okay, I have to give some kudos because we have 3 Career Education Corporation alumni in the same space at the same time. So we have to take 2 seconds to go, woohoo!
Yay, CEC.
Very much a small world that we all sort of,
I
and I think we overlapped too. I think, Kathy, you were there at the same time, although Terry and I weren't there at the same time. You were there in both our tenures.
Exactly. How exciting. All right. So Deborah, talk to us about your journey in higher education.
Sure. I came to higher education almost by accident. I was recruited for a position at CEC to manage and oversee all of their litigation. And for me, coming out of a large law firm, it was a job opportunity that any litigator, I think, would have loved. A lot going on, but I didn't really know anything about higher education. And so I would like to say my passion for higher ed sort of came secondary to the job that I took. But the last 10 years, 5 years on the for-profit side and 5 years on the nonprofit side, I've really developed quite the passion for all things higher ed, and particularly institutions that serve non-traditional students, as CECs did. And again, while my most recent job, most of our programs were at the graduate level, we also did do a lot of work in the online space and with non-traditional students. So most of it on the legal and compliance side, hence my new podcast. So looking at legal, regulatory, and compliance issues. But yeah, so got there by accident and I'm fully immersed in sort of the passion and the mission of higher ed.
That is awesome. So many people say that they fell into higher education by accident. It's really interesting how that happens.
I actually look back at my interview with the CEO at CEC at the time, and when he asked me why I wanted the job, for better or for worse, I told the truth. And I said, I really don't know a lot about higher education, but you have all of these, complicated litigation issues going on, and I have a lot of expertise and experience here, and I am happy to come on board and help you resolve them. And afterwards, I went home and thought, I should have said something about higher ed, but he took a chance on me anyway, so I guess that was a good thing.
That is funny. And Terance, walk us through your journey in higher education and how you became partner and chair of the education practice.
Yeah, so my journey started off at Career Education Corporation as well. I had a very good friend who was in the legal department at CEC. I, at that time, was a young partner at a large law firm in Chicago. And he called and said, we need someone to come help manage the litigation that the company is currently facing. And as naive as I was about higher education, I said, what could you possibly need a litigator for? And how much litigation could a bunch of colleges and universities really have? Well, after he brought me up to speed, I went out, I interviewed, and I took the job, and I was managed the litigation at CEC from 2010 to 2013. And then at that time, I decided I wanted to go back to private practice. So I went back to being a partner at a large law firm. And since then, 90% of my law practice is helping colleges and universities. I am a litigator, so I defend them in court, representing them in class action lawsuits and many other types of lawsuits, False Claims Act cases. I help manage the regulatory inquiries that we all face, whether it's from the Department of Ed, DOJ, FTC, a state attorney general, or various accreditors. And like Deb, I help colleges and universities with compliance and internal investigations, and have been doing that for the past 13 years. I've been at Alston and Bird for the past 4, and we've got a great education practice there, and it's a thrill to be the chair of that practice.
That is amazing. Go ahead.
I listened to Terry tell a story, and I probably should add one more thing, which is a thank you to him, because it is because he left his head of litigation job to go back to private practice that my higher ed journey started. So I don't know if I've ever appropriately thanked you for that. So thank you for deciding to leave your job so I could take it from you.
And as I like
never, right?
As I like to tell the story, she threw me out of my job onto the street, and I was lucky to land back in private practice.
That is awesome. Well, Terry, I love that you mentioned compliance, because what I want to talk about is one of the major departments when it comes to higher education, and that's admissions. Admissions is the first point of contact with potential students. It's also the engine that drives every single school. When it comes to compliance, this is one of those gray areas sometimes with advisors where they're thinking, I have no idea what I'm supposed to say. I have no idea what I should be discussing with potential students. And sometimes when they're so nervous, it creates this area where it leads to sloppy work, where they actually end up getting dinged for it. And so, for instance, let's take financial aid. You may have some schools who the advisors, they go as far as starting the FAFSA application, based on staffing at the school. But then you may have some other schools where the advisors say, whoa, I'm only allowed to say, financial aid is offered to those who qualify. Our financial aid team will go more into detail as far as what your financial aid package would look like. So, Terry, can you discuss with us, what are some of those setbacks? What can advisors say? What should they stay away from? But mainly, what is the point behind? What's the why behind these regulations?
Such an important position within any college and university. It is the first touch point for the students. It is the first point where the student makes the decision on, is this the right institution for me? Is this the right program for me? Is it the right fit? It's an incredibly important job. And, the regulations, the primary regulations regarding admissions, and quite candidly, all institutions' employees, is misrepresentations. The Department of Education has a regulation regarding substantial misrepresentations, and obviously those are prohibited. And then various state laws have consumer protection statutes that also look at misrepresentations. So, what can an admissions advisor say? What should they say? What they should not say? You could boil it down to the analysis that we sometimes use for advertising content, which is the statement true? The admissions advisor should be honest and be truthful about their institution and about their programs and what their program offerings are. I'm not aware of a regulation that says an admissions advisor may not discuss financial aid or the potential opportunity for loans, grants, and other aid that a state has. However, some institutions do draw the line between admissions and financial aid because of the complexity that is associated with financial aid. Admissions advisors have a lot of training. They learn about the institution, they learn about the various programs, they learn about the outcomes, they learn about how long the programs are going to take. They are immersed with a ton of detail. So are financial aid advisors. And they learn very, very different information, and they are the specialist. And so when you have those institutions that have the bandwidth and have the resources to separate those two functions, best practices is to keep those separate, such that the admissions advisors can focus on what their specialty is, which is the institution and the programs, and the financial aid advisors can focus on what their specialty is. And at the end of the day, it circles back to where I start, the student or the prospective student gets truthful, accurate, honest information that they can use to make a decision on whether or not that's the right institution.
Absolutely. I love that. I think what would help also are, some transitional statements, because sometimes when advisors are trying to pass that off to financial aid, they may be faced with the student saying, wait a minute, so you work for the institution and you don't know the answer to that question. And it comes off to the student as if the advisor is trying to hide the information. So I think the easier it is for advisors to become well-versed in how to pass that student off to financial aid and warm transfer, it's going to be easier for everyone.
Yeah, I think we would be naive to think that a prospective student talking to a financial or to an admissions advisor is not going to have questions about financial aid, and that's going to be top of mind. How much does the program cost, and how am I going to be paying for it? That is unquestionably going to be one of the metrics that they're looking at when they're making their decision to enroll. So I do think you are dead on that there should be appropriate training on how to appropriately pass the student on, get them to financial aid in a way that is a good experience for the student. Not that I don't want to tell you, not that I'm trying to hide something from you. That's not my area of specialty. You are going to have the opportunity to ask all of those questions and get all of those questions answered with a financial aid advisor, but they know that space way better than the admissions advisors do. So it's better for you to save those questions for them.
Absolutely. Love it. Debbie, do you have anything to add to this discussion or any questions for Terry?
I would echo Terry's point about the admissions advisors, being sort of that first touch point. I think, from my experience, I think they're the unsung heroes that don't always get enough credit because, they are really the driver between I'm going to come back and ask more questions or maybe I'm going to go on to the next institution. And so I think it's really important, this discussion about compliance and understanding the whys behind what they can say and what they shouldn't say and how they should say it. Because I think the more we empower our admissions advisors to understand the conversations they're having, the better that they can do their job. And I think giving them that empowerment sort of takes away all of that focus on, I'm afraid I'm going to say this, or maybe I shouldn't say that. And so I think it's really important to just sort of give a shout out to all of your listeners on the advisor side for the great work that they do every day. So I wanted to say that. One of the things, Terry, might be interesting to talk about is, many institutions use different techniques to sort of evaluate admissions advisors, what they say, not only from a regulatory and compliance side, but just from a quality assurance, student experience. And we know about call recording, we know about secret shopping. And so as many of your listeners, Kathy, might be aware, recently the Department of Education has sort of weighed into the secret shopping world and sort of given some guidance and thoughts about secret shopping programs. So Terry, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what's been happening in that space as far as the department is concerned.
Certainly. And it's a good point, and it ties in very well. And in March of this year, the Department of Education announced that FSA, Federal Student Aid, would begin using secret shoppers to monitor what admissions advisors are sharing and telling various students. And if you look at the announcement, it says that they're looking for misrepresentations, the very things that we're talking about. And it lists it provides a list of misrepresentations that they're focused on. And one of them is federal student aid. They're going to focus on transferability of credits, job placement rates, completion and withdrawal rates, et cetera. But they're absolutely focused on federal student aid or financial aid that a student may get. And so it's a program that many schools use on a regular basis on their own. It is a tool that the Department of Education is using now, but has used in the past. When I landed at Career Education in 2010, shortly thereafter, there was a report that was published that was used by the federal regulators that had done some secret shopping. They had found some cases that the student didn't receive the information accurately or as transparently as they would have liked, and the department really sort of highlighted it. And we're using it again as another tool to assess and to ensure that students are getting the correct information. And they've indicated that they're going to use the information that they gain from these secret shopping programs and these secret shopping visits to support ongoing investigations and reviews, or to provide a basis to open an investigation. So it's an important thing to be aware of. So it's not something to be afraid of, right? As we've talked about, our admissions advisors are well trained. They know what they're doing. They know what their job. Most of the institutions have very complex compliance measures already in place. That's just another one that's out there.
Absolutely. It's so true. Debbie, we were talking about this the other day, working for a CEC where almost every advisor thought that every single person that came in, they had a suit and a tie on, was a shopper. And, I always used to tell advisors, why are you so concerned? Yeah. If you're doing everything the way that you should be doing it, if you're saying the right things, if you're refraining from certain conversations that does not concern you and it oversteps your department, why are you concerned in the first place? And I think what's happening is some advisors, they're afraid to ask certain questions because they think they should know this information already. But it's very important that if they are not certain on certain areas that they should be discussing or shouldn't be discussing, they need to get over to the director and ask that question before that school gets cited. So I think a lot of it has to do with open communication. Do not be afraid to ask questions. You're unsure, talk to somebody.
I would wholeheartedly agree. And I would also say, not to be afraid to tell students you don't know the answer to something and you can get it for them. That's a better approach. Exactly. And I think the student would, prospective students appreciate that. One other point I would make about sort of thinking about, the Department of Education is now doing secret shopping. I liken it back to, and some of your, your listeners who may have been advisors for a long time can think back to a time when call recording wasn't a best practice and it wasn't standard in the industry. And when it was first being implemented, advisors were saying, what do you mean you're going to record my calls? What do you mean you're going to listen to me? And, not for lots of reasons, right? Mm-hmm. But now I think if you ask most advisors, they would say they're very comfortable being recorded because they're doing it right. They're learning better ways for delivery so they can, sort of look back at calls and say, oh, I could have explained that better, or my cadence could be a little slower. And I think, also it is good sometimes for the advisors if there are claims by prospective students, if you can go to the call recordings and say, well, wait, my advisor didn't say that. This is not what happened. So, I know at CEC, we use them very affirmatively and proactively in that way as well. So I kind of think it's really like, remember the time when you thought call recording was, going to be this terrible thing. I think it's the same thing about, most advisors are already being secretly shopped at a lot of institutions, and they know it. So I think it's just sort of the next layer, maybe.
Absolutely.
It's just another tool to ensure that quality information is being provided to students. Right. And if you look at a 30-minute telephone conversation or face-to-face interaction that is recorded by a secret shopper, it's the spirit of the 30 minutes. If you made one mistake, that's not the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Deb, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's okay not to know the answer to a question. I don't know the answer to that question. Let me find it and get it to you and get it to them accurately. That is the spirit in which the admissions advisors work on a daily basis. And secret shopping is just another tool to help them do their job better.
Absolutely. And for those schools out there who already use these recordings, it's really good to have your advisors listen to their recordings also. I've worked with certain schools where an advisor will listen to their call and they'll go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that's how I sounded. Every single time they ask a question, before the student gets an opportunity to respond, they're asking another one. So it's also a point of training. So advisors understand, wait a minute, I'm not building rapport at all. I'm doing all of the talking. No wonder why I don't know anything about my students. Okay, so make sure that you're giving your advisors the opportunity to listen to their calls also. So, Terry, there is this new discussion on the new gainful employment regulations proposed by the Department of Education. And honestly, reading this article, in some cases, it was a little bit disheartening. Okay. But can you please discuss with us what is the new gainful employment regulations and how can it impact proprietary and non-proprietary schools?
Sure. In most simply, gainful employment regulations are a measure imposed by the Department of Education to ensure that the education that's being provided leads to an outcome that is reasonable for the student, that allows them to repay their loans and get a job in their field that is satisfactory. That, in other words, that the value of the education is providing an outcome that they want. The regulations were initially implemented during the Obama administration. They were rolled back during the Trump administration. And then under the Biden administration, they've implemented new regulations that would go into effect, I believe, July 1 of 23. The comment period in which institutions, the public, anybody with any stakeholder with an interest to submit comments was yesterday. And my understanding is that there were thousands and thousands of comments submitted regarding these rules for a number of different reasons. But the new regulations, as proposed by this current administration, apply to career training programs, which is defined as non-degree programs at all institutions, including certification programs, and all degree programs at for-profit institutions. So it is directed to all programs at for-profit institutions and non-degree programs at non-for-profit. So it applies to all, albeit more broadly to the for-profit institutions. Under the new regulations, they provide two mechanisms by which the department is going to measure the outcome of the program to discern whether or not it meets these regulations. One is a debt to earnings ratio, which is how much debt did you take on and how much are you earning when you get out? And if you meet certain metrics, you satisfy the rule. The other is a new earnings premium test, which assesses the earnings that you get once you graduate against the earnings that a high school graduate would have in that state's labor force. Under the new regulations, if you fail to meet these metrics for 2 out of 3 years, you could lose eligibility to Title IV funds for that program. But it also triggers some mandatory reporting requirements. You have to tell your incoming student, we didn't meet gainful employment, and here's what that means to you. And the students have to acknowledge that they receive that information, i.e., I recognize that this is a program where my debt may be higher than my earnings, or it may be at a higher proportion to my earnings than I would like it to be, but I want to do this program anyway. And in my day at CEC, we referred to those as passion programs. For example, a culinary program, right? Culinary programs are expensive. You have to buy food and wine and kitchens and knives, etc. But when you first initially start as a graduate from a culinary school, you probably aren't starting off as a chef at the 5-star restaurant. You got to work your way up, right? So it's one of those careers where it takes a minute to get your feet under you before you start earning enough to hopefully repay your debt. But that's a mouthful, but that's in some sort of what these rules are trying to address and trying to capture.
Wow. Do you think that this can affect enrollment in any way?
I think so. Would a reasonable consumer decide not to enroll in an institution or in a program because of the metrics that are going to be set out regarding gainful employment, possibly. By the way, all programs, both nonprofit and for-profit, have to issue what those metrics are, even though they're not subject to the consequences of that, at least on the nonprofit side. It is possible that a student could make a different choice. It may mean that they may choose a different program, not necessarily a different institution. Is it going to markedly change enrollment? I don't think so. I think for those programs that are at risk or are far below the metrics that's required to satisfy the rule, those programs may be eliminated. But Kat, you know this way better than I do. Programs are phased in and phased out to meet the needs of students all the time. And so I don't think we're going to see a marked decline in enrollment across the country because of these new regulations. We might see a shift in programs, we might see a shift in offerings, but probably not a decline in enrollment.
Got it. Okay. Debbie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is that, the current administration, this also plays into this focus that the current administration has on disclosure and transparency. And I tie that back to how we started this conversation, which was substantial misrepresentations, telling the truth, being honest. And so if you look at gainful employment, if you look at the regulations about website disclosures for programs that lead to licensure, if you look at state authorization, telling online students what state schools are authorized to deliver online programs to non-residents, these all follow a similar theme, which is disclosure, transparency, and educating prospective students, which I think ties in very nicely to how we started our conversation, which is why it matters for advisors to know what they're talking about and to be able to answer honestly and truthfully. And I think advisors should also be thinking about what information is already available to prospective students on an institution's website as part of these required disclosures, and how that sort of marries up to what their, the way they learn to talk about their programs and their institution. Because there's more than one source of information for a prospective student, and they should align, and all those sources should align.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for that information, because I know this probably takes a huge load, off of so many schools that are listening. Terry, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners today?
Yeah, admissions job, critically important. Well done by most of our advisors. That keep it simple, be honest. Secret shopping is your friend. It's a tool, and Gainful will not shut us down.
There you go. Love it. What about you, Debbie?
I think my closing thoughts would be similarly along the lines of Terry's about how important the role is. And I know from the 10 years that I've been doing this and conversations with admissions advisors over the years, and having attended one or two graduations, which I always joke that, I have 3 daughters. I've been to many of their graduations. I've never really shed a tear, but the first AIU graduation I went to, I cried, because I think your advisors, they're changing people's lives, and to sort of see that come to fruition, just as a reminder about how if the student hadn't met the advisor to get into the program, they wouldn't be walking across that graduation stage. So
Absolutely. Love it. And so, in conclusion, my advisors out there, just make sure that you're doing this for the right reasons. I always say that, admissions is not a 9 to 5, on paper maybe, but really and truly, if you're really passionate about this role, if you're really passionate about changing lives, some of these stories, they stick with you throughout the years, throughout the night. And you think of those students who come into your office who are telling you, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. And then you fast forward to graduation and you see them walking across the stage, some of them with their babies in hand. And they wouldn't have gotten there if it was not for you. Okay, so just make sure you stay in your lane. And if you're unsure about something, just simply ask. But most important, always keep your student at the forefront, because that's what this is all about. Thank you so much, Debbie and Terry, for joining us today. Until next time, bye, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. I have been working diligently to bring awareness to career schools. There's so much that they have to offer our students and our community. Every single role within the admissions process is critical, whether you're a part of the admissions team, financial aid, career services, academics, everyone deserves a voice. Admissions is the first point of contact for your school, so you want to ensure that you have a team who exudes confidence, passion, and a clear understanding of effective communication with our potential students. I totally understand the pain of missed class starts, low appointment and enrollment conversions, and this is why I created Next Level Admissions Training by Motivate with K.A.T. This platform is a step-by-step process, and it is going to train your new and tenured advisors in every single step of the enrollment process to ensure that our students are inspired and they're ready and prepared to start class. Admissions is not easy. It can be very challenging, but it's definitely worth it. So if you're ready to take your school to the next level, head on over to lessons.motivatewithkat.com and check out Next Level Admissions.